What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome to the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game of basketball. My name is Alex Engel, and I'm here with my partner, Augie Johnston. We hope that you're able to take something away from this podcast that'll help you on your basketball journey. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, so today we're going to be talking about shooting the basketball and how to improve on it. What are the different types of ways to shoot the basketball, shooting off the dribble, talking about how your footwork should be. I mean, we're going to get into all different types of topics on shooting the basketball, and we're going to kind of jump right in right now. So I'm going to start off with you, Og, and I'll throw it to you. How important, when people talk about shooting a basketball, first thing they think of is your form. So how important is it to have that perfect form? Is that like you have to have it to be a good shooter, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good debate because you'll see NBA players with not great form. I mean, even like Reggie Miller, Larry Bird, like their form wasn't really perfect, I guess, in a sense. But as far as how important form is, in my opinion, it's very important. And I think that especially if you're a youth player, that you should always be striving to improve your form if you have some things in your form that needs fixing. But there are youth players too out there that have good form, and at that point I think it's more about repetitions and working on shooting when you're tired, off the dribble, all those other things. But I think shooting form is important. I think that by having good shooting form, you are kind of giving yourself, putting your best foot forward as far as being able to become an elite shooter. If you have poor form, you might be able to get by as a youth player a few years, but once you get to that college level or even that varsity level, then, you're going to suffer shooting deep threes. You're going to suffer, being consistent with your shooting. And so with that good form, you're just kind of giving yourself, I think, the best chance to succeed.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think one thing you kind of mentioned is I think you just give yourself like a higher ceiling when you have good form. I guess that's the best way for me to describe it is, if you've got really great form and you get tons of reps in, then you're probably going to be a pretty good shooter. And if you've got really bad form and you get tons of reps in, you still might be a decent shooter, but I just feel like your ceiling normally isn't as high. And obviously, there's individuals that have weird form, like you said, that ended up being great shooters anyways. But generally speaking, for most of the population, you've got to have, there are certain things that you just have to have. You've got to have a follow through. Like you've got to have your wrist aimed towards the basket. People talk about the gooseneck or whatever it is. There's just those simple mechanics that I would say most coaches teach, that if you can get them down and get them fine-tuned, you're going to elevate your shooting ability and definitely give yourself the chance to be, to reach this super high level in the long run.
Yeah, and I think there's so many different variables in shooting, right? There's elbow in, there's follow through, there's balance. There's so many different things. Like for me, kind of where my form breaks down is in like more of a late release in my shot. But really that's the only main kind of form issue that I have is I have a little bit of a late release. Mm-hmm. And so, with all those things in mind, having one small piece maybe be off, I don't think is going to destroy your shot. But when you start looking at, okay, this kid's elbows out, he releases late, he's off balance, he has no follow through, and you come up with all these different things, then I think you're going to find that, yeah, this player probably is not a very good shooter. But like I said, if you have just maybe one thing that's off or one thing that's a little different, then you can still become a great shooter. And I think that's what we see with like the Reggie Millers and Larry Birds and stuff that actually can shoot with bad form is everything's right except for one small thing that you're seeing. And so it's not going to just totally destroy your shot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think most of the time when you do see kids or adults or whoever that struggle to shoot the ball, there is more than one thing wrong with their form. There's multiple things that they struggle with that just because I think the word you used was variable. And I think that's the best way to describe it is there's tons of variables when you're shooting and you're trying to limit them as much as possible. I mean, that's why when you think about the guide hand, realistically, you could shoot a basketball with one hand, and if you were able to balance it perfectly every single time, you could technically be as accurate with one hand as with two, because the guide hand's not supposed to push the ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is that's not reasonable because you can't carry a ball like that in full speed, so you've got that guide hand to keep it balanced, and then you're shooting with your other hand. And those things are just supposed to be there to limit the variables. You talk about like power, right? And usually power is supposed to come from your legs. It's not supposed to be from your arms and your legs, because then you're adding more variables in. But we all know it's not always that simple. Like, it's easy to say that, but it's another thing to actually go out there and do that, and get those reps in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think everyone says, the power comes from your legs, and I agree with that statement. But at the same time, you have to be able to transfer that power from your legs and to have that smooth jump shot, right? That one motion shot. And so, I mean, that's just one thing in itself that's very challenging for players to do, and something that youth players struggle with. And the reason that they develop bad shooting form is because they're trying to recruit more power, right? I would say like the majority of like people who have bad form or have some kind of glitch in their shot, it's because they're trying to recruit power by putting their elbow out so they can crank it, or whatever the case might be, is because they're not strong enough yet, right? Or maybe they are strong enough, but they're not able to, like I said, transfer that power. I mean, you look like at guys like Steph Curry, like he only jumps like 6 inches a lot of times on his shot, right? He doesn't jump that high, but he's a master at the one motion shot to where he's transferring that power into the shot and he can shoot it from deep. And it's like it's effortless, right? That's kind of where we all want to be, right? We want to be effortless shooters from deep, where it just, we don't have to do anything different than just flick our wrist and guide it in.
Yeah, and it's quick too. His shot's really quick. And to talk about like some of the other ways that players recruit power, is the one I see a lot is like the dip, the hip one, especially when they're real young, because it's like they're trying to fling it. And then, and I think at a young age, it's okay to an extent to allow certain things, that maybe as an adult we wouldn't allow to teach a high school or a college kid. But at a real young age, like, they may not have the power to have perfect form and even get the ball close to the net, So there are little things you can kind of let slide here and there, but as they get older and as they're growing, you have to be very diligent about working on those specific things. I mean, like, okay, you've been shooting from down here. Now we've got to get you turning, and you know what I mean? We got to get the ball up a little more. It doesn't have to be all the way up here, but we got to get it up a little more, because if you don't, and then it develops into a bad habit, it is so hard to break those habits sometimes, because especially, I guess if you're a parent and you're working with your kid every day, maybe that's a little easier. But if you're not, and you're a coach or you're a trainer and you see them once a week or even 2 or 3 times a week, and then they go home and they don't practice anything that you teach them, they're not going to get better at all. And it could take years for that to develop. And I know we've both worked with kids where it's like, man, we've been telling you for 5 years to change this, and you still got the same jump shot. And it's just because they don't do it themselves and they've developed that habit. And I think a lot of people are afraid of changing, or because it feels awkward. It's like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Or, oh man, I'm missing more now. And they don't realize, like, you have to break it down completely to build it back up. And they'll break it down for like 2-3 weeks. And they're like, oh, this isn't working. I'm going to go back to my old jump shot,
Yeah.
So,
It's hard. It's hard to go to a workout and try to shoot with your new form and just miss and miss and miss and miss. But yeah, in my opinion, I agree with that. It's definitely necessary. And kind of one thing I wanted to add, and something that maybe you've heard of before, maybe the listeners have probably not heard of before, but this is like a theory. And I don't know where I heard this, but it makes total sense to me. And it's something I would love for somebody to test someday. And that's when you have a child, let's say the doctor says your kid's going to be 6 foot. Okay, so 6 feet, that's 4 feet under a 10-foot rim, right? So when you're a child and you're, let's say, just starting to play basketball and you're 4 feet, you are now 6 feet under a 10-foot rim. So why not lower the rim down to make up the difference, so that no matter what age you are, you're always shooting with the same ratio as far as the distance from how tall you are to the rim. And that way you're able to shoot on a lower rim when you're younger and develop the form, because you don't have to recruit power. And so you're able to develop that, that perfect form. And we actually have a player that kind of did something similar to this on our high school team, who's a very good shooter, who was a free throw champion in the area and actually went and competed on a free throw competition on a national level. And his dad was very particular on this kind of thing. He never let him shoot threes. Like, he didn't let him shoot threes until he was like probably a freshman in high school. And this kid's an incredible shooter, incredible form. And I'm talking about a kid who's a junior in high school right now who can make 23s in a row. And it's what he does. And it's just a cool theory that I think makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I mean, they're definitely, I can't say that that's like crazy. I can't sit here and say that doesn't make sense. Like, that does make sense, because if you have that same form your whole life, you're going to be so locked in, to that when you get older and you get that power. I guess, to kind of play devil's advocate, the only thing where someone might speak against that is if you're only able to shoot mid ranges and you're in seventh, eighth grade and other kids are able to shoot threes and do this and the other, you're limiting part of your game. And now I'm not saying that, we want to be eighth grade champions, right? Like that's not the end goal for most players in basketball, but maybe someone might argue like you're limiting your game. So you're not going to get the ball as much. So maybe you're not going to get as many shots up, as many touches. You're not going to be as comfortable scoring all that much. And then as you get older, sometimes you develop that kind of mental, like, oh, I'm not that scorer. I'm not that type of person, or maybe the high schools don't look at you the same way as you come up. Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I can see both sides to that argument there.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if it was like written in stone, you can't shoot a three in games and stuff. But I think just like when they go, like kids nowadays, you open the gym up, they go in there, first thing they do is step to the 3-point line, start jacking up threes.
Or half court.
Yeah. And so I think the idea is just like, okay, stay inside, stay in close. But yeah, like with my own son, I would love to test that. Like I would love to, he's super young now, but when he's like 3, let's get him on the 3-foot hoop, holding the follow through,
You might have to.
Yeah.
Might have to be a baller boot camp experiment.
Yeah, seriously. And the funny thing is too, is like I have another friend who has a son who must be about 2 or 3, and he's already got him with the form, right? No ball, but he's able to, he knows what to do, like hold his follow through, flick his wrist, jump off the ground. So I think that's kind of like the starting point, right? You start without a ball, get your form, take it from there.
Yeah, no, I definitely think, like I said, there is definitely some logic behind that. So that'll be interesting. We'll have to check back in like 10 years and find out if that works. So kind of moving on then, or moving not on, but moving into another segment that works really well. I'll read off this one is, so you've got a kid with a broken jump shot, right? And, he's struggling, just isn't shooting well. And he comes to you and wants to have it fixed. So first off, how and then when do you fix those things?
Yeah. So as far as how to fix them is you got to analyze, right? You got to analyze what the player is struggling with. And, if it's missing left, missing right, missing left, then that's a different fix than if you're, missing short every time. So if it is like missing left, missing right, then you need to take a look, in my opinion, at the elbow. Is the elbow in? Are we squared up to the basket? Are we drifting side to side? But yeah, just looking at kind of the main things that everyone looks at. I mean, I don't think there's like a real secret science to this, but you want your elbow in, you want to shoot straight, you want make sure you're holding your follow through. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but I teach the dip. I teach like a slanted footwork too that a lot of people don't teach, instead of 10 toes to the rim. But yeah, as far as fixing it, it's just reps. It's getting in close, like I said, to the basket, where you don't need to do anything crazy with your form or your shot, and getting your reps with good form. And I know a lot of people really are not fans of one hand form shooting, but I actually do like form shooting, and I like to do it from the top and keep it high and do form shooting, and then bring it down lower and then use 2 hands. And then I like to work on shooting the ball while getting off the ground, like we talked about, by helping players transfer that power from their legs up into a one motion shot into their follow through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, not just how, but now what about when? Like what part of the year, when do you do that? Because you if you do it in the middle of the season, that's probably it's gonna throw your shot off quite a bit. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's an off-season thing. Like during season, I don't want to, in my opinion, mess with really too much as far as form, because just the whole mental side of shooting too is like something that's very like fragile. And so as soon as that off-season hits, if you're early and diligent on it, you really can in one off-season change a thing or two that's really going to help you for the next season. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, I think right when that season ends, if you did not shoot the ball well, you need to sit down and look in the mirror. You need to sit down with somebody that understands your game a little bit, and just pick one thing. Like I would not go in and try to change like 5 things in someone's shot. Like I would just try to change one thing. Like, hey, you're not holding your follow through. So this off season, like when we work out, you're holding your follow through on every shot. And yeah, that's basically how I would go about it.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the when, and then I'll go to the how. But to kind of even further touch on the when, I think like as soon as that season ends, as your previous season ends, and you take a week or two to kind of let your body rest or whatever, right then, like you got to start immediately. I think once it's like, I don't know what the exact time is, but I would kind of generalize once it's like 3 to 4 weeks before the next season starts, it's too late. Like you can't be a month out before season and be like, I'm gonna change my jump shot now. Like, nah, you waited too long. You should have done it 5 months ago in March. You can't do it in August and practice starts 2 weeks from now or whatever. I think it's that at that point it becomes too late. So it's got to be like right away. You got to work on it, and you got to spend 4 or 5 months, and then that way, by the time you get to August or September, and school's starting up again, and you're starting practices and getting ready for preseason, that even if it's not perfect, then you still have like 2-3 months of preseason practice to work on it and try and develop, and tweak little things here and there. Because if you go into your preseason and your shot is all jacked up and it's worse than it was because you just started breaking it down, realistically, like, you're hurting your own playing time to an extent, right? Like if you can't make a jump shot all practice for 3 months straight, coach is probably not going to have you playing a ton of minutes when it comes to playing games.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky thing because you want to get better and improve, and that's obviously what the whole goal is. But you've got to do it in a way that doesn't affect your own playing time, and I guess you could say the team, right? Hopefully, you're helping the team as well. So that's my spiel on the how or on the when. As far as the how, I agree. You got to analyze every kid differently. It's not a one size fits all thing. I will tell you one thing that I see a lot of, and I don't know if I didn't notice it when I was in high school, or I don't think in college I really had many teammates with this issue, but definitely high school, junior high, maybe I didn't notice it. But so many kids shoot still with two hands. And it's not like the full two-hand shot. People think of two hands, they're thinking of like that type of shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the hand up here, and then when they follow through, they go like this, and they push
Yeah.
with their left, with the thumb. Yeah, it's a lot of thumb action, but sometimes it's more. And yeah, it's surprised me now that I do a lot more training, how many kids do that. And I try to work with them on it, and some develop it and they figure it out, but some struggle. And that was something that for me personally, I never struggled with that. I did have, kind of weird spots where I held the ball sometimes. When I was younger, I kind of held the ball down here more. Now I have my releases a lot more high, but I never had the two-hand thing. And I don't know why that develops for so often, I guess, of all the things. We talk elbow out. I probably see that a decent amount too, but I'm again, I don't know how it is for you, but I swear I see so many kids that are in high school and they're still shooting with this, and they're talking about sophomores and juniors, and it just surprises me. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if anybody really knows why that is, but that's probably the main thing that I see. And it's hard for them, like, because they're so used to it. If you take that hand and you're like, hey, don't turn it, like their mind literally can't stop turning. I'll be like, all right, next time don't turn it. And they'll be like, okay. And then they'll just turn it again and again. So I don't know, that one's been kind of one of the difficult ones for me.
I feel like that's another recruiting power thing. I really
Yeah,
do. I feel
it
like
is.
a lot of it is because, I mean, I remember personally as a player, I want to say like the first time I really kind of started like even practice shooting threes was probably like 8th grade. Like before then, I don't think I even like would step out there when I would like, practice or whatever and shoot threes.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, kids are shooting threes young because, the trend and, the value. And a lot of times they're able to shoot okay, but it's just different now, I think. And so these kids are finding, trying to find more ways to recruit power, and maybe the thumb thing is one of it. But yeah, I see that all the time too. And I remember going through a stretch as a player, like subconsciously or not subconsciously realizing like, hey, my thumb is like messing me up sometimes,
Mm.
and working on fixing that. And I feel like I did eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, now that you say that, obviously it definitely is a recruiting power thing. But yeah, it was just surprising to me that it's that specific one that I see more than anything else. But
Hmm.
all right. So now that, speaking of shooting 3-pointers, we're going to talk about shooting the mid range. Okay. Right now, the analytics are threes and layups. All the analytics guys love threes and layups. So what's your thoughts on the mid range?
Yeah, so in basketball, my philosophy is that nothing's black and white, right? Even like for certain players, like your 5-man, 7-footer, can't make a three. So, some coaches would say, you're not allowed to shoot threes. Well, are you trying to tell me he's not allowed to shoot a three if there's 5 seconds left and he gets the ball and you're down by, three? Like, so there are areas, nothing's black and white. And so that's how I feel about the mid range. But as an overall philosophy that I have is, I don't like I don't want us shooting a ton of mid rangers. And last season, even, we really started off the season like, let's get layups or threes. Like if you're in the mid range, let's look to kick. And one thing that I kind of found was that I think that's a good philosophy, if you believe in that. But at the same time, there's certain players where that's really all they can do. Like, right, they can't, like, we have players that, they're not great 3-point shooters and they don't even look to shoot threes.
Mm-hmm.
They're too small to get to the rim and finish. And so they don't, like, if they get to the rim, they normally get blocked or pass it out. So like in those kind of instances, like I do probably want that player to, pull up for a little mid-range jump shot over attacking the 6'8" guy in the paint when you're, 5'9". But, driving baseline, pulling up for a mid-ranger that, is going to bounce long or bounce, into the center of the key. And now you're out of position. You can't even get back on defense. Like those shots, I don't like those at all. Behind the backboard, mid-range, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you can prove to me that your mid-range shot is being made at 50% or higher, then I'm good with that. Otherwise, I don't want you shooting mid-rangers.
You see, we differ on this one. This is probably one of the ones we differ the most out of all the topics we've talked about. I love mid-range. And again, I want to be clear, like it does depend on the player, right? Like if you can't make one mid-range out of 50, probably shouldn't take the shot, right? But if I do teach all my players how to shoot the mid-range because I know that there are going to be situations where they come off a screen and there's nobody there and they're wide open at the free throw line and there's, a post sitting in the paint waiting for them. And it's like, okay, you can learn the ability to hit this shot and then it keeps the defense honest, or you can only be able to make layups and threes. And then every time you're open in the mid range, you'll never make it when you take it. Like if you don't practice it and put any work into it, you won't make that shot at a high percentage. You might shoot like 10% from mid range,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like I teach all my girls to be able to do it. And even the kids that I train, I teach them to be able to shoot a mid range because I feel like you should be able to score at all three levels. You got to be able to hit a three, hit a mid range and make a layup. To be a well-rounded player. Now, does that mean we're looking only for mid ranges? No, like of course I want open shots, open threes and open layups would be great. But if you're wide open and you can hit a mid-range, like I encourage my players to take it because realistically, with the way the game's played, like I don't know that there's a ton of opportunities to take open mid-ranges. Most of the time when players drive, the mid and paint is pretty packed. So if you do get one that's open, it's only going to be a handful of times a game. And I just think like you got to take those shots and make them because it just keeps the defense honest. And sometimes that is more valuable than even making it at such a high percentage. Because now if that post has to come out on you because you hit one and now you can get by and go to the rim, that can really open up the game too. But like you said, there's got to be a balance. You can't just like contested mid ranges. No, don't like those. But I also don't like contested threes. So I can't say that one is worse than the other, But I think there's this really big push against mid range. And I'm not sure why, because there have been, some of the greatest scorers ever to play. And really, if you look at it, some of the greatest players in the game right now are guys that live in the mid-range. Like you look at Kawhi, even LeBron, like those guys aren't amazing three-point shooters. They can shoot it, but, Steph obviously is a great three-point shooter, but Kawhi, LeBron, even look at guys like Giannis or Anthony Davis, like those guys are all guys that play in the mid-range and they can score at a high level. And granted, it's a little different with the high school kids, right? We're not expecting them to make a living off that, but I think it's okay to you're open, take the shot, but you also got to actually put the time in to work on it. So
yeah, definitely. I think being able to make mid-rangers is definitely part of being a good basketball player. So that's definitely something you should be working on 24/7 as part of your overall training. But as a coach, part of our game plan is make them shoot contested dribbles or contested jumpers off the dribble from the mid-range. Like that's what we want. Like however you're going to play your defender, if whatever you're going to give up, if you're going to give up anything, give up a contested mid-ranger off the dribble. So, a lot of things that you do defensively, you try to, make sure you're not doing offensively against the other team. And that's kind of as an overall philosophy, how I feel about it. And, it's an analytical thing, it's if you do the math, and that's where the whole push for this has come from.
mm-hmm.
And for the fact that people are shooting the three better now, right? People are shooting 40% from three at a higher rate than they used to. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do prefer drive and kick threes and layups at the rim. But, you know, like I said, I had a point guard last year that did amazing in the mid range. But the problem was that he would shoot that baseline one too sometimes, and that's where it was just kind of like, like that's hurting us because you missed that shot. It's now they're off to the races on a 5-on-4. So, but yeah,
Right.
I mean, as far as the players go, like work on your mid range, you know, work on your little step back in there. And I mean,
Hmm.
if you're ever going to be a high scorer, you got to do it in every way, right? But if you're more of a role player that's, you know, not looking to shoot that much, you know, I'd rather you shoot two wide open threes than two wide open mid rangers.
And I think kind of when you're talking about the analytics, I personally would strongly caution people to get too caught up in analytics. Not to say that there's no value in analytics. I think there is value in it, just like all stats. But the fact of the matter is, like, analytics don't play the game for you. Like, you play the game. So you've got to be able to do stuff even if the analytics say that's not a great high percentage shot. Well, if you can hit it at a high percentage, then use it. Like, who cares what the analytics say? Realistically, most of the guys that analytics guys never really played basketball, I'm gonna be honest, so like, it's different. To anybody can sit there and crunch numbers, but to be in the flow of the game and come off something and be like, oh, I'm wide open, let me take a shot, I have nobody around me, you got to be able to hit that shot. I think it comes down to that. So
Yeah, no, I
um
agree.
so, all right, now that we're talking about that, and this kind of ties into it as well, what about shooting off the dribble? We see a lot of kids that can catch and shoot. And I know, I watch guys that, okay, they can catch and shoot around the 3-point line. But as soon as I make them go off the dribble, it's a whole different game. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I definitely can relate to that as a player. I was nails on a catch and shoot, but as soon as I put the ball down the deck for whatever reason, it always affected my shot. And it wasn't until later in my career where I guess this through repetition and just kind of probably changing my training a little bit as far as putting the ball down more in my workouts and stuff and using pick and rolls, I was able to develop that skill better. But I mean, as a coach and looking at my team and stuff, like if you're shooting off the dribble, a lot of times you're either ISO and you're using some isolation or you're shooting some kind of contested shot. So I mean, I'd rather you use that dribble to get to the rim and draw help and dish it for a layup, or draw help and kick it out for a three so that we can gain an advantage. Now move the ball to keep an advantage to hopefully later to get a layup. But I'm good with shooting off the dribble as long as it's like a shot fake, right? My player jumps, I use the dribble, get inside, hit a jumper, or come off a pick and roll and my guy gets buried. There's no hedge. I pull up in that little sweet spot. Stuff like that I'm good with. But as far as like we said with the mid range, right? Like I just caution that if we're shooting a lot of jumpers off the dribble, then we're kind of playing into their hands, right? We want layups at the rim. We want to get to the free throw line, right? That's the highest point per shot you can get besides a layup. Uncontested layup is a free throw.
Hmm.
So by shooting jumpers off the dribble, you're limiting the amount of free throws you're going to get. But as far as like from a player, I do see and I do relate with players that it's just more challenging, and you got to work on that.
I think, yeah, and I think, obviously, I agree with the idea of, like, if you're just taking a bunch of contested jumpers off the dribble, you're probably not giving yourself a good percent chance to score a lot, right? So, there's, like with anything, there's a balance. But as far as if you want to be an elite player, if you really want to be good, you got to be able to shoot off the dribble, because if you can sit there and catch it and shoot, that's fine. But if you run into situations where teams just get out on you really quickly, or they're just like shadowing you, or they're boxing one or whatever it is, because you're that type of shooter, and that's it, and you can't dribble and do anything else, off the dribble to score, or take a jump shot, then you kind of become useless almost. You're just a decoy out there. Now, obviously, yeah, you can run off screens and this, that, and the other, but there's still situations where you've got to be able to put the ball on the deck. And let's not mix up shooting off the dribble with, like, dancing, right? When we're talking about shooting off the dribble, we're not talking about taking like 15 dribbles to go 3 feet, because I cannot stand that. And I think most coaches would agree, like, that's counterproductive. But you take 1-2 hard dribbles, or you got the ball, like you said, on an ISO, and you make 2-3-4 dribbles maybe and make a move and get a shot off. That stuff I'm okay with. And again, if you're open or it's late shot clock, and I think you've got to work on it as a player if you really want to be elite, because, like I said, what I noticed between certain players and others is really just some can catch and shoot, and they may be a high percentage with that. And there may be someone else that doesn't necessarily shoot quite as high of a percentage from just catch and shoot right on the 3-point line, but they can also shoot off the dribble, and they're just a better player. because they can do that. I think it's kind of like, almost like an equalizer, or it actually bumps you ahead, I think, a lot of the times, unless you're just like a crazy, crazy, crazy knockdown shooter, you know? So I'm a big fan of it. I mean, for me personally, like I'm a point guard. I have the ball in my hands a lot. You've obviously played with me. You know my playing style. Like I like having the ball and pulling off the dribble, but it's also something I've spent probably thousands of hours working on. So if you're not putting that time in, just like with anything else, then it can be a very low percentage shot.
Yeah, and not only just the low percentage, but just it's all about how you go about it, right? It's all like you just said, like you're talking about guys that all they do is catch and shoot, and they can be limited by that. And yeah, that's true. That's why it's hard to find a player that can do it all. If you can catch and shoot at a high rate, if you can shoot off the dribble, if you can finish at the rim, if you can use screens, if your ball handling is good enough to get you, into the sweet spots, then you're an all-around player, right? You're a great player. So the thing is, I feel like most players, they are good. They can shoot off the dribble, but then they're not great catch and shoot players. And like, for example, like a prototypical point guard, like he's probably a lot better off the dribble. And I've even had teammates tell me that were point guards, like, yeah, I shoot way better off the dribble. And I was just like, what? How?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's just because of the training you've done your whole life and the style of play you have. And like for me, I always, when it came to shooting, I always had a partner and I was catching, shooting, 1,000 shots or 500 shots. And if I was by myself, I was tossing it out, catch, turn, shoot, toss it out, catch, turn, shoot. And, I do my little one dribble pull-ups, but never in my workouts was I ever like dribble, 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 hezzy, cross, jumper, like maybe like I'll end a workout with a few of that, but like that was never like a bulk of my training. So I guess that really the answer is like, if you are a player, like just make sure you're not, eliminating one side of the equation here as far as shooting. Don't just do catch and shoot, and don't just do off the dribble, and work to develop both.
Yeah, I mean, the more well-rounded you can be as a player, the better. And I think we both try and make our players as well-rounded as can be. And there are some coaches that are not a big believers in that. They're like, "No, you're a shooter. You sit there and catch in the corner and shoot. And I don't want you doing anything else for the next 3 years." And that's personally, to me, I'm not a fan of that. I think it stunts players' growth, but that's how some coaches run their stuff, and some coaches are successful doing that. But I've always tried to be a player's coach, and I've always felt like, if I was a player, would I want my coach just to be like, "No, you have to just sit in the corner"? Like, no, I'd want someone that's going to try and develop me and help me become more well-rounded. Now, if you're really strong at just catching and shooting, does that mean you should be taking 15 off the dribble shots every game? No. Probably most of your shots should come from catching and shooting, but you can maybe expand and take one or two, and at least give yourself a better chance to open up the game for yourself. So, all right. So now we're getting to a little bit more kind of into form, I guess, but I guess it's more technique here. Dipping the ball. Yeah, this is kind of another one of those hot topics. What do you think about dipping the ball?
Yeah, so if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about here, we're talking about when someone passes you the ball and you catch it, you actually dip it down maybe to your belly button area before you go up with it into your shot. That's kind of the dip. And I'm a fan of the dip. I think it helps build rhythm. I think it helps with recruiting power. And I remember as a player, I can't remember who it was, but one of my coaches, we were working on not dipping the ball, right? Because that's really common, is to teach, to speed up your shot, right? To have a quicker shot is to catch, not bring it down and shoot it. And it's hard, right? It's hard to make shots doing that. And I took note of that as a player. And so I was like, you know what, when I'm coaching someday, I'm probably not going to teach that, just because of my personal experience. And so I do teach the dip, and it's not like something I like make players do, but like I just don't do the opposite and say like you're not allowed to dip the ball, right? And I do teach them to get quick feet into their catch, and then dip their body down to recruit strength. I think everybody does, right? When you jump, you don't just jump from here,
right?
You go down and then you jump up, and it's kind of like the same motion with the ball. So I do teach it, yeah.
I'm kind of like in between. So I actually kind of have a personal story with this. I used to dip the ball really, really badly. I'd go all the way down, like to your knees, damn near, and dip the ball. And in my sophomore, at the end of my freshman year at Cuesta, the head coach was like, "Hey, like speed your shot up, because you're 5'10", like you don't have a ton of time. If someone's 6'5" is closing on you, you got to get it up quick." So he's like, don't dip, like just catch and go up. So I worked on that and I spent, the whole off season doing it, got into the season, and it jacked my shot up. Like I did not shoot good. That was the worst 3-point shooting season of my career, was that sophomore year, because it took me so long to adjust to that. But then I eventually did. And the following year, my junior year, was actually my best 3-point shooting season of my career, because and I realized, later, that it took me so long to like get used to it. Now I don't catch and just go like catch straight up every time. I do probably dip a little bit, but I don't dip a ton. So that's what I'm kind of like in between on teaching that. If you drop it a little bit and it's quick, to get a little bit of power, I don't mind that. But I don't want necessarily my players grabbing it and dipping it down to their knees, because I just feel like it's so much slower. And I think, there's certain situations you're not going to be able to get a shot off. But at the same time, you've got to be able to balance, well, do you not want to be able to get a shot off, or do you want to be able to not make a shot, right? Like
Yeah.
if you can't make a shot because you're not able to dip and you're just catching and going straight up and you're airballing or you're way off every time, then you either got to spend more time practicing that in the off season, or maybe just that's not for you. It's not a one size fits all. But personally with my players, I kind of tell them, look, if you drop a little bit, I'm okay with that, but let's not exaggerate it, because you don't want to add an extra like entire second or two to your shot, because in a game, a second is a lot of time. We both know how much room can be covered. So obviously the more efficient, the better you're probably going to be.
Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of like research and stuff on this. And I honestly don't, I'm pretty sure I ran across a resource like this, but don't quote me on this. But I think the actual dipping of the ball does not add any time to the shot. It actually just it's actually just part of the biomechanics of shooting. Even if you weren't to dip it and you were to catch and keep it here, you're still going to dip your body down, right? You're still going to bend your knees. And so the dip happens as the knees bend, right? So as I go down and my knees are bending, the dip is happening. As I'm going up, the ball is going up just at the same rate. So
Right.
I'm not sold on the fact that it makes you a slower shooter, but yeah, I mean, I think that it does add. One thing that I worry about is just the adding of the variable, right? So now you have a variable of, the ball can wiggle as it comes up, or now maybe it's not coming up in a straight line, or your elbow's not in. So that's kind of the thing that I worry about with the dip mostly. But I think as far as time's concerned, I think it's got to be pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably not a huge difference. I don't know. I still feel like there's somewhat of a difference in time if you can learn to just get it. But I don't know. Maybe I'll need to check that article out, and I could be wrong about that. The other thing too is the more you dip, I feel like, and again, this is probably not a huge thing, but it is another variable, is the more you dip, the more time you give the defender to get their hand in there and strip it too. Like on a jump shot, if you're catching it and you're going all the way down, it's easier to get your hand at someone's waist and just swipe that ball out when they're dipping it than it is if they're here and they're just going straight up, and for you to get up there and block it. Realistically, how many times does that happen in a game? Probably not a lot, but it is just another small variable to think about. So.
Yeah, and just to kind of close this out, this idea is, you already said it, but the reason that I kind of abandoned it as a player is because I was like, listen, my goal is to make the shot, and if it's going to take me a millisecond longer to shoot it with a dip, like I'm willing to increase my shooting percentage by 10%,
Right,
and dip the ball rather than not dip the ball and shoot 10% less. So.
right, and it's like, okay, even if I guess you could argue also, even if you're going to get blocked once a game because you're a little slower, I might trade getting blocked once a game to shoot 10 or 15% higher. Not I might, I definitely would. Like that's not even a question. So it depends on what you're trading off, and you've got to kind of look at that as well. So, all right, so let's get into our final topic for today. 10 toes to the rim or slanted feet. Okay. When we're talking about our stance and our position. So we're talking about 10 toes to the rim. It's kind of self-explanatory, having your feet perfectly squared up, or slanted, where your feet might be a little off to the side, either one or both feet. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So if I was to teach a player, I try to teach 10 toes to the rim. But this is like one of those tweaks that I would make to someone's shot, right? If they are struggling to shoot the ball straight, then I would probably have them tilt their feet just a little bit of an angle, because how I feel is like biomechanically, like I said, like this is all related to biomechanics, what's comfortable, right? Is if with that tilt, you're just able to get that elbow in a little bit better. I mean, you could try it yourself by just putting your feet straight and put your elbow in. You're going to feel like stress in your shoulder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you tilt them, now you kind of got the angle to where you can shoot the ball straight, keep that elbow in. And so that's just more. I do teach 10 toes though, because I feel like if you start out with that, then it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse, and you're just going to keep turning and turning till you're shooting almost sideways, which we don't want. And because, you know, balance, right? In the game, you're not just catching and shooting, you're running, you're catching, you're turning. So that's just like a small tweak that I make.
Yeah, I think as much as possible, you want to try and keep them squared up, because I think that's the main thing is you're trying to keep their chest and their body facing the basket. You know, you don't want everything turned super sideways, right? So I think as much as we can, we're trying to teach that. But personally, like, I don't shoot with both feet squared up to the rim. I shoot usually, and I'm trying to think about this, it's easier when I'm physically doing it, but I'm thinking about it. I think my right foot is straight. My left is slightly out. So it's more like almost like a cone shape, you know, like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just comfortable for me. And when I stand, like if I stand there and I go both feet straight up, it's not comfortable for me. You know, it just does not feel the same way. So, you know, little tweaks here and there, moving the feet, I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's whatever is most comfortable for you that's going to make you most consistent. And, you know, if that's straight, if that's 10 toes to the rim, great. If it's a little slanted, that's fine. Just don't, like you said, don't overdo it, because you don't want your whole body turned sideways. You know, that's when you get those kind of weird, like sideways half turn shots, you know, like the Lonzo Ball, where the shot's coming from the left side of his head going right, you know, because the body's turned kind of weird or whatever it is. Maybe, again, that's probably a recruiting power thing for him as well at some point. But I've just seen weird things where guys are their body's so turned, it's almost like they're shooting sideways, you know? But yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. I think with most things in shooting, and if you've been listening this whole time, you're probably hearing it, you know, the technique, the form and all that, there is a goal, and you do want to try and hit those things as much as possible. But if you have one thing or another that's a little bit different because it's just a little more comfortable for you, that's okay. It's not a science formula or a math formula where it has to be the same every time. And I think that at the end of the day, if it's working and you're shooting a high percentage, then don't change it. Like, don't fix what's not broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Don't fix what's not broken. And there's a whole nother side to this shooting thing too, that's like not form related. And I'm not even really talking about like the mental confidence side. I'm talking about the whole like adjustment side, right? Like if you're missing short, then you know you need to add a little bit of arc, add a little bit of power to it. You know, if you're missing left, if you're missing right, then you need to, you know, figure out how to fix that as well. And normally if you are missing left, then it's probably going to be overturning, right? You're shooting and turning your body too much when you shoot. You're jumping and turning in the air. And if you're missing to the other side, then it's probably the elbow out. Your follow through is going the wrong way. Right. And so you got to be able to adjust those things yourself. And if you're missing short, you know, I say this all the time, but like if you were to go in the gym right now and shoot 100 threes, and let's say you made 50 of them. Well, out of those 50 that you missed, I bet you that you missed about 40 of those short. Like if you really track your shooting, you're going to miss a majority of your shots short. At least that's always what I've seen with a lot of players and what I had personally. So that's something that you got to work to correct, right? So, and that's a mental thing. So I always, when I'm working a kid out, I always say, you know, if you're going to miss long and straight. Cause like that's the easiest thing to correct. Left, that's hard. Right, that's hard. Short, that's hard. But long and straight, then that's pretty much a good shot. You know, you're just a little bit off there.
And you still get a chance it's going to go in, even if it's long and straight. If you're short, left, or right, it probably isn't going to have a chance it's going to go in. Long, you still do, you know. And I think what you said about adjustments is important for players to understand. If you're missing a certain spot, you can't keep doing the same thing. And I think that sometimes, you know, I'll see kids and like, oh, I'll keep missing. I'm like, okay, well, are you changing anything? You know what I mean? Are you doing the same thing? Oh no, I didn't change. I just did the same thing. I'm like, well, you're going to miss a million times in a row to that same spot if you keep doing the exact same thing. Like you have to make an adjustment somewhere. If you're short, you know, you got to use your legs a little more, whatever it is. You're right or left and make those adjustments. But you can't just sit there and shoot up 200 shots and miss them and then be like, man, I don't know why I'm not improving. Well, you're not actually changing anything. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again. So I just think, remember, like what you said about adjustments, that's very important. Be aware of your body and what's going on while you're shooting. Don't just go out there mindlessly and shoot the ball up. So
yeah, and if you are missing a lot of shots, like scoot it in. Like keep your form, scoot it in. Like when you're doing shooting drills, like you should be above 5 out of 10. Like if you're not above like 5 out of 10, and this is like probably all the way down to like age, I mean, honestly, it could go all the way down to like even like fourth or fifth grade, because if you're shooting under that, then scoot in, scoot
Right.
in. So if you're a high schooler shooting threes and you're like a 3 out of 10 every time, like, no, you're not, scoot it in, and let's get that up to 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. Okay, now you're at 7 out of 10 from the mid range. Let's
Hmm.
bounce it back. And now we're at 5 out of 10 from three. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, you're 5 out of 10. Let's keep working. Now we're 6 and 7. Oh, we're 7 out of 10 on average. Okay, now let's give you the opportunity to step back and shoot, from college three or NBA three, or, just deeper.
Hmm.
But you got to build that foundation.
Yeah, and again, for any young guys listening in, like just to give an example, and I don't know what it is for you, but I remember being in college and we had one of those shoot away guns, so and it tracked our percentages, and I'd say on average from three, on average, if we were probably shooting like 65-70%, like that was
Yep.
fairly typical. The real good shooters are shooting like low 70s, maybe even mid 70s. They're having a really hot day, and everyone else probably mid 60s or so. So that's where you got to be at if you want to be that type of, if you're, and remember, you're shooting 65-70% in practice, and then in a college game you might still only shoot like 35% or 40. If you're shooting 40 in college, that's like a pretty elite shooter usually.
Yeah.
So just understand that like making 4 out of 10 in practice does not mean it's going to translate to the game. That means you're probably going to be like 2 out of 10 in a game.
Mm-hmm.
So just be aware of that as well. So any last things you want to touch on before we get out of here?
No, I just think one final thought on shooting is I have seen it time and time again, and anybody can become a great shooter. I don't think that's the same for every aspect in basketball, but I think for shooting, that if you really put in the practice, it's just like throwing darts, man. It's the same thing, right? You just need to practice it, have good form, and just continue to get better at it. And players that struggle with confidence in their shot, it's probably because you haven't got enough reps in and you haven't got to that point. I mean, I know when I was making, I mean, not to do a little humble brag here, but like in college, I was a good shooter. And at one point I was 40 out of 50. We would do shooting drills, 45 out of 50 sometimes. And at
Mm-hmm.
that point I was like, okay, I better start looking for some threes in the games, because like I can shoot them. Like I'm confident. Like I know I can do it. But if you're in practice and you're shooting, whatever, 20 out of 100 or, 10 out of 50 all time, then yeah, you're not going to be a confident shooter, because why would you be?
Right. Yeah. And
So, yeah.
it goes back to what we talked about. I think, we've said in previous episodes that how do you build confidence? Well, you get a ton of reps up so that, in practice you can hit those shots, and then you can kind of move that over to games.
Yeah, and you got to be brave too. Like you got to, when that opportunity comes in the game, you got to be brave and shoot that shot. And when you do have that breakout game, then that's going to be, confirmation that you can do it, and that's where confidence comes from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Then let's wrap this thing up today. Thanks for watching. That's all we got for this week. If you like today's episode and you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, make sure to subscribe as well. We come out with a new episode once a week, and we hope to see you in the next one. Peace.